Welcome, everyone, and another wonderful and beautiful day. Yeah, I know. I say this every time, but it's a wonderful day, and it is beautiful. It's blue skies outside, and I've got Malumir. Did I say that correctly?
Malumir.
Oh, I
Close,
feel
close.
so ashamed. Oh God. But yeah, we're gonna have a great time. And last time she came on the podcast, she gave us so much gold about her life and the background and what she's gone through. And if you haven't listened to that podcast, I suggest you go back and listen to it. I will leave a link down below. So do that because it's highly, highly interesting. And loads of people have come back and given great feedback with the amount of gold she gave over. So thank you very much for doing that last time. But this time we're coming round and we're going to speak a bit more about a business, maybe about her background, but mainly about her business, which is really interesting. So take us forward. Introduce yourself again and let's us start with what you do.
Yes. So I am not someone who's ever been able to do just one thing. So I'll start with that. And it's been true throughout my career. Currently, I think I mentioned in the previous episode, I'm actually on a medical leave from my primary role. I'm just dealing with a serious medical situation. But of course, that's never anything to stop me from still trying to make a difference. But normally, I'm in a leadership role. I've been working for a couple of decades. In recent years, I've been in several different leadership roles in strategy and operations. So I do both the high level thinking piece as well as the active doing and implementation. I do have experience in various sectors and in all sizes of organizations, and I'm really passionate about leadership. But also, I am a university adjunct professor. I teach leadership in practice, so the actual doing of the leadership, because it's one thing to have all sorts of head knowledge and theories, and the theories are wonderful and they're really useful.
Mm-hmm.
But in today's extremely complex environment, how do leaders actually do high quality leadership in a sustainable way that is ethical and high performing? That is a significant leadership challenge in the landscape today. And so I am so passionate to teach that course. And I also teach career navigation for folks who are a bit earlier career. And then I do also have a small business in the spiritual industry, which is quite a 180. But I believe that, like all of us, every single one of us is a whole person with a wide variety of interests and abilities. And I think that the more tapped into our whole selves that we are, the more effective we can be in all parts of our lives. And so in my small business, I've created indie tarot decks. So, tarot cards that people like to use for reflection and journaling and divination. I've created those as well as a number of other items. So I do a lot of things.
I know, without a doubt. Now, when it comes to leadership, how do we attack this? When you're trying to help leaders become greater leaders or people that want to be leaders, where do you start from? Is it a situation, do you help from the point of view where you're helping individuals, or are you helping companies learn to lead by examples? Where do you start? What's the situation there?
So in terms of teaching, the people who are coming into that program, it's a master's level program at a university, and I'm teaching the second year of leadership. So these are folks who already have the theoretical basis, and now we're getting into the messy stuff of, okay, how do we do this? And so folks are coming from various types of experiences, various sectors, and they're also bringing their own identities and lived experiences into that classroom. And so where I start folks is actually with mindset. We start with mindset because once we kind of tackle self-awareness and recognizing a leader's mindset, then we can tackle other pieces, like we talk about power and we talk about ethics and we talk about what humanistic leadership is, I talk a lot about a concept I call ecological leadership, which is not actually about the environment, although it uses the environment as an analogy. And as well as talking about meaningful resilience and how do we actually thrive and not just survive. So that's in a nutshell. But I always start with mindset, because recognizing that as a leader, whether it's of your own life, even if you're not in a formal leadership position, you are a leader of your own life. And that is the first kind of aha moment in terms of mindset. But recognizing that whether you're a leader of yourself or of others, you are having a disproportionate impact on the lives of whoever you are leading, whether it's yourself or others. What do I mean by that? I mean that you're just one person, but you are having a greater impact than only that of one person to the people who are looking to you, to the lives that you are affecting. And so that is typically where we start. And there's a great deal of self-awareness that is required, and curiosity that is required to begin thinking that way.
My, there's so much information there. So let's just roll back to the mindset from the beginning, because what I tend to find is mindset can be quite difficult to teach anybody. It's easy enough to teach someone a skill. That's so much easier to do, to teach a skill, but to change them to be streetwise, to have the right mindset, that's a very difficult trait. And usually that's not something you can do overnight. That some people can take that on and they'll take weeks, others will take years, and others will never come to fruition. So give us examples, difficult examples that you've had with people you've been able to change their mindset, even though it was almost an impossibility at the time.
Sure. So one example I can think of was a student I had a few years ago where they were already in an executive type position within their organization, and they'd achieved a great deal, and they were already coming with a great deal of experience. And what I would say that prior to the course they did not yet have was that they were just going about their work experience, their career, their lived experience from the perspective of their own lived experience, which for them, they had experienced the workplace and the world as someone who's a woman, but they otherwise had a lot of advantages they didn't realize that they had. And in the section of the course where I talk about recognizing that systems exist, and within systems, we all have a lot of internalized stuff that we don't realize we've internalized. And that's no one's fault. This is just the reality of growing up in the world. I think I've talked about it before, where, we may unintentionally have, even as people who are neurodivergent, we may have internalized ableism, where we might get down on ourselves and kind of, think, oh, I wish I could just concentrate, or I wish I could just, instead of recognizing that actually that's because we're comparing ourselves to another system that is expecting something different because it was just set up by people who are not like us. And so, I go through a whole section where I talk about these kinds of concepts. In the literature, it might be referred to as anti-oppressive discourse, which is, a fancy way of basically saying, recognizing not everyone has the same lived experience. Some people have exceptionally challenging lived experiences. And as leaders, it is incumbent on us to actively avoid doing harm, but also not accidentally do harm because we're not paying attention to harm that could be right in front of us, right? And so during that section, I spent a great deal of time encouraging folks and working through activities to help folks think differently about their experience in the world, and how there may be other and different experiences of the same scenarios.
Okay.
And in doing so, people started to recognize, oh, wait a second, there's a bigger picture here. And wow, some folks are actually having a dramatically different experience than I am. And this particular student came up to me on the last day, and they'd had a bit of an aha moment the the day before on the cab ride on the way into the class, where they were talking with the cab driver, and the cab driver made an offhand comment. And they came in, they were so excited. They said, normally I wouldn't have even thought about it, but I actually, engaged in a conversation with the cab driver because they had asked the cab driver to take them to to a particular building, and the building is named after someone who was a Black scholar.
Okay.
And so that they actually engaged in a conversation with the cab driver on this topic. And they weren't being condescending in any way. They simply had a conversation with the cab driver about what the realities would have been for a Black person to become a scholar at the time they did. And they set a bit of context and talked about actually that things can still be very challenging these days, for people who are racialized. And by the time they got out of the cab, they'd had this great conversation with the cab driver. The cab driver was also now thinking about things in a broader context. And this person realized, wow, this is real, and I can actually make an impact. So to me, it's moments like that that just fill me with the joy and passion that I have for teaching, because it means that someone actually had an aha moment, right? Because sometimes you're up there teaching and you're thinking, I want so badly for this to be integrating for people to come away really having had some aha moments, and to actually have those moments where someone comes up to you and their face is beaming and they're just telling you about this amazing, they've actually applied what they've learned. It's an incredible experience. So I'd say that's a good example.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And it's beautiful when you're a coach, a consultant, an educator that sees a student apply what's been taught to them, and not necessarily do everything you say, but apply it from their point of view, and it's a positive thing. Then you feel like you've done great, someone's actually listened, and I've actually brought value in someone's life. Let's talk about the systems, because you say people already come with their system, and then you have to apply a system on their system, so to speak. Does that make sense? Because obviously you've got to change them into leaders, which means if there's anything, any kind of negativity in any way, be that a blueprint system or any way of thinking, you've got to then change that. How easy or difficult is it for you to change that mindset or the system they come with? Do you find it quite difficult for people to be stubborn in their ways because they've been working a certain way? And is it reasonably easy to be able to change that? And how would you change that in general?
So I would say that I know, and I know it's a common thing in some in many circles to believe in deconstructing the system or breaking down systems and starting again. The approach I'm taking, because I come at this as a pragmatist, and as much as I would love to press a button and for there to be dramatic systems change, and as much as I believe that change is possible, what I'm actually doing is I'm trying to equip these leaders, both current and future leaders, with frameworks, and I offer different ways of thinking about the same information that is in front of them, right? So really, I'm just offering them, I'm offering them some general concepts, but encouraging them to think about what they already know in different ways, because I actually believe that people are very, very resourceful. We have so many more resources and abilities that we often don't even realize that we have. And what I see my job as an educator is you already know a lot of this stuff. And by the time you're coming into the class, you've read the materials. I offer a wide variety of materials for people to absorb. And I don't even agree. I deliberately do not agree with all the materials, because I'm not trying to tell you thou shalt think this way. Rather, I'm trying to offer you principles and suggest that you as a leader need to become clear on what your values are. Because when things are murky and things are messy and multi-layered and compounded and complex and conflated, as many issues are these days, and you as a leader have to guide through that, how are you going to know how to do that if you don't know what your core values are? So there's a lot of time spent on values and really critical thinking. It's rather, instead of you should think in these ways. It's more about how to practice skills and activity and resources that people naturally do anyway, but that we've all often unlearned, like curiosity. I talk a lot about curiosity, and curiosity as a leader is crucial. And yet lots of folks have forgotten how to be curious.
Yes.
And they may not see what the benefit is. So that's the tact that I really take, is I'm encouraging people to reconnect with what really matters to them. I'm encouraging them to think about things from a different context, to zoom out, to zoom in. I teach people how to think strategically, because that's just a skill, right? But if you learn how to think strategically, and if you learn how to better connect with the information that you already have in your mind, because here's the thing. So we can only ever consciously pay attention to between 5 to 9 things at a time, right? Okay. But our minds...
But hold on, I'm a man. Do you think I can do that, really?
Maybe you're closer to the 5.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I like you now. I like you.
But here's the thing, though. In reality, our minds are way more powerful than what we think they are, because our minds are actually processing tens of millions of pieces of information when we think we're only paying attention to a handful of things at the same time. We're catching, there's so much more information our mind is processing in the background, and that is a treasure trove of opportunity. So what I teach people to do is learn how to pay attention to the little flags that go up in the back of your mind that are like, hello, pay attention to me. We've often forgotten how to pay attention to that, right? Because we're focused on what we should focus on, and we must be very serious because this is business and it's serious. And we end up closing down ourselves from our own resources and information, which is not productive, right? So I'm trying to reconnect people with the processes and abilities they already have, and to value it, and to really build that self-awareness so that as they become better connected with their own resources and values, and they learn to zoom in and zoom out, they're better able to navigate the very tricky waters of leadership.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I resonate on that more than one level. I mean, it seems like you customize exactly with every single person you interact with for them to be independent on the way they think, rather than follow a book of rules, and be rigid in that fact. And also, as much as we may be going to a similar or same destination, the path is always different for everybody. So you've got to know how to fight that path yourself. Now that resonates with me also, because I was having a conversation with someone today, actually, and they were saying how I'm able to, like, for instance, this podcast. When I'm doing podcasts, I don't really know anything about the background of the person. I don't have any lists of questions, nothing like that whatsoever. What I do is what you're talking about, is listen, then act on what is being said, and find problems, situations, the question I need to ask. And then you have this natural progression, and it's dynamic and unique every single time with each person that I have a conversation with. Now, all I'm doing, I'm applying the same thing in my life. I do this in my life, and I'm just applying it to the podcast. And you're talking about the same thing, really. It's having the skill set to listen and react on what you hear by using a set of rules. Does that make sense? Is that correct, what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think, it's and even to build on that, it's also it's about having those aha moments, so that people don't have to think so much about rules, but more think about the values and the concepts that really resonated with them. So, for example, when I talk a lot about ecological leadership, and what I mean by that, because I mentioned I'm not actually talking about the environment. What I mean by that is, to be an ecological leader, you need to think about, okay, when I'm making a decision and in my everyday leadership, what is effective and serving me and benefiting me as a leader right now? What is serving and beneficial for my team what is effective for and beneficial for my organization.
That's right.
All of these things, both now and in the future. So I call it ecological because it's like an ecosystem, right? Like you've got the birds and the plants and the flora and the fauna and the animals and the soil and the microbes and all of the things together. Like you can imagine, I think we can all remember, you know, we learned about the ecosystem back in school, and they would show a picture and it would show all the layers of the soil and the water and the trees and all of that. It's that idea. As a leader, we are creating and influencing that whole environment at all times. Even if we think we're not, we are influencing it, because remember, we have disproportionate impact. But that impact that we're having, it's affecting not only now, but also in the future. We are affecting the future. And we need to be sustainable, right? Because this is another thing that so many organizations, they really do, they treat people like the fuel in a car, which you can just, you know, run through and just get more new fuel, as opposed to treating people like the engine, say, which you want to keep in good condition. But at the end of the day, people are neither fuel nor an engine. People are people. And we need to recognize that every single person is a whole person with a whole life and a whole story and a history and a lived experience. They are all of that before they're anyone's anything, before they're an employee, before they're someone's partner, before they're anyone's anything else. And that has intrinsic value. And, you know, and the fact is, the business cases exist that when you treat people well as an organization, it's not about being mushy. It's just about treating people with respect. Imagine that. The better that you treat people, the more sustainable your business model will end up being. I mean, to me, it's also just do what's ethical, for goodness sake. But also, the business case is there. It's wise and smart to treat people well and to make sure that you're making those ecological decisions, because when they're good for you and the team and the organization, both now and in the future, you're setting yourself up for success.
Great. So let's talk more about sustainability. So you've spoken about the situation where treating people well, that's part of sustainability.
Yes.
So let's talk further about that, because a lot of people don't talk about this sustainability. So let's speak a bit further now. What more can be done when it comes to sustainability?
More absolutely needs to be done on sustainability. And one thing I would like to make very clear, because I'm very passionate about this topic. I've done research on this topic, on the topic of resilience, because, you know, we hear a lot, oh, you got to be resilient, you know, and then there's resilience training offered at work, and there's billions of dollars spent across the globe, you know, in corporate workplaces on wellness and well-being programs, which is great. It's great to invest in well-being programs, but the issue with the way that resilience is being used when it's applied to employees is it tends to be, well, you know, you got to be resilient. Just keep punching above your weight. You know, we small but mighty, and all these terminology, which just really tells you, well, just keep going. Who cares? Have a tea, take a nice bubble bath from time to time, take a vacation day every now and then, I suppose, but just keep going. That's not resilience. That's not resilience, and it's not sustainable, right? About 43% of the workforce globally is burnt out or burning out. That's bad.
That's huge.
That's really bad. Burnout is not a thing to ignore. It is not a par for the course. It is not acceptable. It leads to all sorts of medical issues. It can lead to disability. And also, people are not doing their best. If they are burning out, if they are at the point of burnout where they have not yet been forced off the job due to being hospitalized or due to other medical conditions, you're not getting their best. They're not feeling their best. They're not contributing in a way that feels good. And you're not getting the best performance. They're not going to be thinking clearly. It's really a problem. But here's where I take issue, and here's where I think about it from a leadership perspective.
Okay.
So much onus is put on the individual. Well, you need to have better boundaries. You need to take your vacation time. Stop working so many hours. All this onus is put on the individual. And sure, it's good to have boundaries, take care of yourself, blah, blah, blah. But when you look at the World Health Organization definition of burnout, it refers to unrelenting workplace, like chronic stress that is insufficiently managed. The managed part, that actually refers to it being a leadership problem. It is an organizational responsibility. It is not on the individual to manage it, because individual staff do not control or manage the work that is assigned to them. It is an organizational issue. And so when we talk about sustainability, we need to be pragmatic and recognize that when people are always on urgent mode, when everything is urgent and everything has to get done now, well, we're losing sight of what is actually important, and you're just not going to get the best of people. Everyone understands that from time to time, things go off the charts busy, but they cannot stay like that. Okay. So, as an analogy, I can't run right now because of my medical situation, but normally I'm a runner. But the longest I've ever run is a marathon. But I have friends who are ultra marathon runners, which means that they will go and do 100-mile, not kilometer, mile run. Here's the thing. They're not running the whole time. I've had conversations with them about this. I'm like, how do you run for 100 miles without dying? And they're like, well, actually, you can't. You can't run 100 miles. How do you do it then? How you do it is that you run for a short distance and then you power walk. Like you're just it's like almost like you're hiking. So you're walking, running, walking, running, walking, running, walking, running. You are not running the whole time. And the second thing is you're not running fast. When you're running, you're not going fast. You are doing like an easy jog. When we apply this to the workplace, it's the same concept. Our careers are a long career. It's a long haul. You cannot sprint the whole way. Right? It doesn't function because the mind is not designed for that. We are designed to also have rest. We must get sufficient rest. And although, as much as we need to take it on ourselves to try to guard ourselves from a leadership perspective, it is actually a leadership responsibility to ensure that we are creating workplaces that are sustainable so that our people can continue to do their best work and that they can continue to not only, feel good about their work they're doing and be able to contribute and feel great, because most people want to contribute, by the way. Most people, I will just say, laziness does not exist. It does not exist as a biological or neurological thing. The idea of lazy, that is a moral judgment, that it's a social construct that has nothing to do with actual neurology. And so when people reach the point that they are getting too tired to think straight and to collaborate and to do their best, it's no longer a sustainable model. And why wouldn't you want a sustainable model as a business leader, right? I can tell you from my own experience, because this is how I have led teams. And yes, it can take time to set the environment in a way that is psychologically safe and that is collaborative and that is high performing, but that you're going to take the time anyway. Whether or not you intend to, you're creating a work environment for your teams. So the time is going to pass anyway. Why don't you spend the time making sure that it is sustainable? Because I can tell you as a leader, it is actually less effort when you take the time to make a genuinely psychologically safe environment that your team feels is safe. You don't get to decide whether or not it's safe. They'll decide if you have created a safe environment. You can have the intention, but they get to decide if you actually succeeded. But you're going to set that time up anyway. Put in that intentionality, and guess what? A, people will want to stay in your team. B, you'll continue to get their best work because they're not burning out and they're still thinking clearly. They're still working together. They're still performing. And they probably won't be trying to leave your team in droves. And secondly, when people do leave to take promotional opportunities, then you'll have people who want to come and work for you because your reputation will have preceded yourself. So it just makes sense. It just makes sense. Anyway, I went on quite the tangent there. I get very passionate about the subject matter because it is so possible to do, and yet we need to see a lot more of it in the leadership landscape.
No. You're right to say what you said, and that's why I left you to say, because it was the right thing to do. So what we can say about leadership is not only about being efficient with helping workers be efficient with working, but as leaders, we are very much responsible for their well-being. And that has really, when I think about it, that has to be the mainstay when it comes to being a leader, because without the well-being of a person, they can't be efficient for a long period of time, as you was talking about the analogy of, with the fast pace, slow pace, etc. We can't be sustainable with the workforce. Otherwise, you're going to have a high turnover, bad reputation, etc. And that's not good for the team, really, seeing this. So let's talk more about well-being, as it's such a massive thing, a very important thing. You've already spoken a bit about the well-being, what can be done. What more can be done when it comes to well-being?
From the perspective of individuals?
From the perspective of individuals.
Okay, so from the perspective of individuals, so one of the things that is so important to recognize is that we must not over-identify with the work that we do, right? With our jobs, right? We've all heard of folks who go, well, I'm the CEO of whatever, and they don't know what life looks like if they're not the CEO of that organization, right?
Okay.
And, in fact, what happened to me is an excellent example. I have built up my career over all these years, and then I had to go on medical leave from my primary role because my body forced me to, and I was dealing with a very unexpected situation. So, and now I also couldn't run. I couldn't do some of those other things that I enjoy doing. And I can't even read right now, reading, because of the way that whatever this condition is affecting my eyes and my brain. I'm a reader, I'm a runner, and I'm a leader. So who am I if I can't do these things, right? So this is why it is so important. And it comes back to values, right? What really matters to you, and how do we live a fuller life? This doesn't mean sleeping less, by the way, and doing more. What it means is making little adjustments, making shifts to make sure that we're meeting our full variety of needs. So working in a job, for example, maybe that's meeting some intellectual needs and it's meeting tangible needs in terms of paying bills, but is it how are you meeting your emotional needs? How are you meeting your spiritual needs? And some people may not actually consider themselves spiritual, but I actually think that we all have a way of interacting with spirituality, even if for you, you don't feel spiritual. And what do I mean by that? I mean that to me, spirituality is actually just connecting to that which is beyond us. So what does that mean? That could mean contributing to community, right? Community is outside of myself. Nature is outside of myself. That kind of idea, right? So even if you're not into the spiritual part of spirituality, you can still connect to that which is beyond you. And when we lead that fuller kind of life, where we're making sure that things that we actually care about and have interest in, that we're doing something with them, it actually helps us to be more resilient, because then it's like having on a bicycle, the spokes in the middle of the bicycle.
Get you, yeah.
All of those spokes help to maintain the integrity of the bicycle. The reason there are so many is what if something happens? What if something happens to one or two of them, right? And you need to still maintain the bicycle. So how many spokes can you have? Don't just have, a single spoke going across, right? Don't just have two. Have various things in your life that, even if they're small, even if they don't take up too much time, do invest that time in yourself and your interests. You deserve to have your interests. You deserve to have and enjoy those things that you enjoy, as long as you're not harming anyone, where we find meaning in other things and we really get closer to what our values are, right? This helps us to be more centered and grounded as people, so that when things happen, we can actually still be connected to ourselves. So for me, just because I cannot do anything athletic right now, does that mean I'm not an athlete? No, I still have the mindset of an athlete. And let me tell you, when you become disabled, you actually want that mindset of an athlete, because the athletic mindset is one of, okay, this is a challenge. This is a challenge and I can overcome challenges. Maybe I have to adapt. Maybe I can't do the thing that I've always done, but I can find another way to still get the thing that is important to me. I can still achieve. I can still try to achieve my wellness and my well-being, right? It's that mindset. So really, even though I'm not doing athletic things, I'm not climbing mountains and running marathons, I'm still being an athlete. And similarly, maybe I can't go and be a leader right now because I just am not functional enough to do my primary role. Well, I'm still coming on and having these kinds of conversations with folks where I can talk about the things that I'm so passionate about in a way that I genuinely hope is empowering and lighting up people, and that folks are having integrations in ways that are supportive of them. So in that way, okay, maybe I'm not actually getting to lead right now, but that doesn't mean that I'm not still a leader, right? So it's that kind of idea where we can always find another way, but we need to have built up a little bit of a foundation, experiment a little, play a little. It's okay. I know we're adults, but we can play. It's okay to be curious and try things and build that full life.
And the thing is, with the advent of technology, I mean, we can be leaders regardless of where we are. We don't have to be physically anywhere. So it's how we interact with, family. It's how we interact with people that we work with and beyond. So you're still a leader, because I'm sure you get phone calls to say, oh, could you help me? Because
yes, I do.
and there you go. So you're still leading, right? They come to you for advice for a reason, and you're still leading. It hasn't left you. It's just turned you've been able to communicate in a different form rather than
Yes.
be one-to-one, face-to-face. That's all it is. So you still got the skill set there, and that's really great. And I love the whole idea with the spiritualism part of it, because it's all very well having these frameworks, systems, etc. on paper. But it's another thing when you need a whole ecosystem, so to speak, So as much as you've got these things on paper, but also you need the spiritualism and all these other things that interconnect, which help you become a great leader, some empathy, and so on and so on. And this helps to create that sustainability, understanding where people are coming from, and also getting that loyalty. You get loyalty through looking after people and doing the right thing. And then you don't have this big turnover of staff and so on and so forth. But just the feeling of doing the right thing, isn't it? Isn't that great? And you so eloquently just described with the spokes of the wheel. It's so important from the networking point of view, having the people and reaching out. So not only taking, but also reaching out. What can I do as a person to help, so-and-so person or the community, etc. And that's how you rise to set yourself goals, right? To become better, to reach out further. What do you think of that whole process, and how would you go further with that?
Absolutely. And I think it's such an important point in terms of networking, because, you asked, well, I'm sure people still call you up. I mean, the fact is that although I'm not talking to people who are from my workplace, from the teams that I was leading, they're all, they're functioning well and they're doing their thing. But I do have a very broad network of people, and people regularly reach out and they're like, you know what, do you have time for a quick phone call? I know you're going through a lot, do you have time for a phone call? I'm going through some stuff. I'd be, really value kind of just chatting through it, or just doing little check-ins, via messaging with people, and, or people reaching out via messaging and saying, well, thanks for checking in. Things have been a little rough lately. And the fact is that as we build networks, and I always encourage people to, networking is not just about looking for a job. It's not just about a professional network, because sometimes that can be very limiting when we tend to think of, well, let's say someone works in, sales of restaurant supplies. Well, you don't only want a network of people people who will purchase restaurant supplies. It's also smart to have a wider range of networks across sectors, across kinds of work, across levels of work, because it's as you said, it's not just about what is benefiting you, because that whole ecological way of thinking, I actually think, is a really useful way of approaching life, right? And approaching our connections with other people. It doesn't need to have an obvious, well, this is benefiting me today because, well, it's good to connect with people and meet people. There was one person, there was someone who once interviewed me who asked, of who did I want to meet with and have dinner with. I think they asked who, if I had to name 3 people, who would I want to have dinner with? And they were supposed to be influential people. And so, I named a couple of names, but then I also said, but the fact is, we all know these famous people, but I think that so many of us have very fascinating stories where we've overcome obstacles and we've demonstrated resilience in these quiet ways that the rest of the world never hears about. So I want to meet those people. Those are the people I want to meet.
You're
and
right.
you know how we meet them is we meet them through networking, whether it's just on LinkedIn, like looking up people at maybe other organizations that we've worked at, and we're not even necessarily looking for a job or looking for anything in particular. Again, it comes back to curiosity. How are we being curious, right? Or in terms of, again, if we're reaching out to community and we're somehow being involved in other things, and there's so many ways of doing this, right? Especially, let's say, for the disability community who may not be able to physically go and do things. There are many online communities, and there are interest group types of communities. There are activities types of communities. There are all sorts of ways of connecting with people to reach out, get to know them, follow them a bit, right? But practice curiosity. That is really the biggest thing, is to practice curiosity and build connections and relationships with people over time, because you never know what you're going to learn. And you also never know what you're going to be able to offer to someone, right? And if everyone was practicing a little more curiosity, I think that this world would be quite a different place, wouldn't it?
No two ways about it. I mean, you've said this a few times to do with curiosity, and it is very powerful having curiosity, which basically to me means that, finding out and being, what is the other person doing? Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? Those kind of questions. Now, when it comes to that, I'm sure you get plenty of students that aren't natural curiosity type people. And that's a problem, because, part of the core of all of this is you've got to want to know why, how, where, etc., all these things. So from that point of view, how do you delve into that? How do you help them be curious?
That is a great question. I would say that most people naturally, when we first come into the world, we are full of curiosity because we haven't yet had it hammered into us that we shouldn't be curious, right? I think quite often, adults can be the challenge there, because kids naturally are curious. Well, why this? Why that? And by the time they've asked 3 whys, what happens? Often adults get frustrated and tell them to be quiet. So it's more about helping folks to maybe not unlearn, but relearn how to be curious, as opposed to unlearn how to not be curious. And so what I like to suggest to people are a few things. So when I'm encouraging people to be curious, the first thing I start with is suggesting that they try to think about it from the other person's perspective. Think about your audience. You always have an audience, whether that audience is your roommate or your partner or your colleagues at a meeting, or a friend that you're going to lunch with. Whoever you're talking to is an audience. And the reason that I frame it that way is that when we're talking to an audience, we're not just sitting there talking away. We're actually thinking about things from the audience's perspective. What do they need? What are they looking for? Now I'm already asking questions, and I'm thinking, well, what could help them? What is beneficial? What are they interested in? And so that's one thing I would suggest, is first start with the mindset in terms of thinking about not just listening to people, but really paying attention and trying to understand from other people's perspective. In terms of activity, one activity that I often suggest is that I suggest that people actively look for something specific, and it could be something as simple as look in the spiritual community. I might say, look for a sign, or I could suggest to someone, let's say someone's having a really rough week, and I might say, look for a little message from the universe for you this week. What does that do? That opens up someone's curiosity, and now they're becoming more open as opposed to closed off. right? And I'm not trying to change the way they're thinking. I'm not telling them to lighten up, because, that doesn't really work. I'm not trying to change the way they think. All I'm suggesting is be on the lookout for a little message for you from the universe this week. And it allows people to open up, and then they're paying more attention, and they're taking in more of their surroundings. They're listening more, and then they will actually find something that uplifts them and encourages them that week. Now, I don't usually go around, just saying, oh, look for a sign. But, because usually if I'm chatting with someone, one-on-one, or I'm talking with a friend, I'll usually get an intuitive nudging that there's something that they could be looking for. But I think it's just, neurologically speaking, it's a great practice. I think if we all look for something, or look for something positive, look for good news, right? This is something that I started doing within the first few months of my medical condition, when it was the winter. And winter in Canada can be quite challenging, because not only is it cold, but if it's snowing a lot and it's gray a lot, you're not getting the vitamin D. It's just, it could be a rough time. And I was dealing with this debilitating condition, and no answers were coming from the medical community, and I was feeling stuck. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to look for, I want 3 pieces of good news this week. Three pieces of good news. And what did that do? That shifted my mind to look for positive things, look for something uplifting. And this is not about toxic positivity, about, just be positive. Because we also need to acknowledge that, yes, things can be hard, but also keep looking for the uplifting things, because we can acknowledge both. It could be both. Yes, things can be difficult, and we can also look for uplifting things. When we are looking actively for something, we will find it. And that encourages us to be curious and to be more open, and to recognize that we don't have to have all of the answers, and we don't have to have all of them now. So those are some things I would suggest.
My God, your insight is just amazing. And I suspect that the insight that you have is not something that you've really studied. It's something that you've really come about and lived. Would that be right?
That would be correct. I do have formal training in terms of neurolinguistic techniques, in terms of how language and neurology can be used in an empowering way. I do have formal training in that, but I don't otherwise have formal training in those other things. You're correct. That's lived experience and a lot of sheer determination, I will say.
Yeah, I mean, we went through the other podcasts we did, and I would say, listeners, please just go through the other podcasts, because we got into a deep dive in her mindset, the disabilities she has, etc. So I'm not going to go too into it now. If you want to do that, go back to that one, and as I said, I'll put the link below. But trust me, it's totally understandable that she's a great leader, because great leaders tend to go through great turmoil. You don't become a great leader by just taking it easy, right? Would you say that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there are probably that many examples of really high quality leaders who had it super easy. I do agree with that. I will say, though, I think that that just because someone goes through something difficult, though, doesn't automatically mean that it will, because
that you have to. There will be people out there that have, I shouldn't say no one's had it easier, but easier, shall I say?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is just simply a reality, right? That, for example, that leaders who have intersecting identities will absolutely, just hands down, have a more difficult time than people who do not, right? And that is just a reality. And, people who've had certain lived experiences that may not be related to their identity, that if they've had circumstances that have been exceptionally difficult, that is something that is just an obstacle that will make it more difficult, to work through. So yes, so it is certainly possible for some folks to have had a more difficult experience than others. I guess the question is, regardless of whether a leader has had more advantages or more difficulties, how can we be wise stewards of whatever we do have? I think that's the more important takeaway is how can we be a wise steward of whatever we have gone through, right? So how are we investing ourselves and our energy and our influence in ways that are wise and ethical and sustainable, regardless of what we've been through?
Do you tend to think about these specific things on a regular basis? So it's like you're checking in on yourself and think, how do I A, B, and C? Is this something that you tend to do on a regular basis?
I do. So I do this both formally and informally. Informally, just from sheer experience, and I'm constantly looking to learn. I think practicing a growth mindset is really important, and we do that by remaining curious and remaining open and always learning, because we can always learn. No matter how awesome of a leader we are, we still make mistakes and we can still learn. But I do also firmly believe in leaders setting aside designated time on a regular basis to reflect and check in with themselves. I think that is so important. And the reality is that most very successful, high-powered leaders, regardless of whether they're, well liked or well regarded or whatever, but really successful, high-powered leaders do tend to do that. They build in regular time to just think and reflect, where they're not doing the doing. It may look like they're actually just not doing anything, but they are actively thinking and they are reflecting, and that is such a powerful tool to use. I generally recommend folks do this about once a week. And lots of folks don't have control per se over their calendars, but if there's a day or time where there tend to be fewer meetings popping into your calendar, book in some time for yourself in your calendar as a recurring thing, and don't just ignore it as a thing that you can ignore, right? Actually honor it, make a thing of it, make sure that you go get yourself a tea or a coffee ahead of time, and that however you are engaging in your self-reflection, that you actively set that time aside. It is very powerful. And, just do it for a month, every week for a month, and then go back and look at how things are different, and you will see a difference.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That's a very powerful thing when you put time for yourself in a diary. I remember I spoke to a friend of mine, Benjamin. He's a Formula One director. And I said, Benjamin, how do you make time for your family? When you're so busy, I totally understand. And you treat it just like a meeting. You have to make time for them. You pencil in your diary, that is your time for 2 hours during the day, and it's as simple. Unless you've got an emergency, other than that, it doesn't. And you know what? Doing things like that for your family, for yourself, it is very powerful, and you should manage it as such. I know it sounds, it doesn't sound sexy, it doesn't sound nice, right? But it is practical, and it does work.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, for sure. And I listeners, I would suggest you to do it, especially when you're in business. You need to make time for yourself and your family, and you, exactly as you would have a normal meeting, have a meeting with yourself and have a meeting with your family. It works no ends. And as she says, keep to it. You're just as important as your client, even more so, would you say?
Absolutely, because you need to invest in yourself and make sure that you are keeping yourself fresh, that you are still thinking clearly, because the more that you invest in yourself, the better positioned you are to be successful. Once you're external facing and dealing with other people, you have to take that time and be internal facing. It will make you that much more powerful within yourself, as well as in your ability to navigate your landscape.
And with that said, I think I'm going to put a line in the sand, because as always, I could speak to you forever and ever, because you've got so much gold and so much information. And the thing is, you're always smiling, as my dad would say, when you smile, it's sunshine. That's what he would say. For sure. Is there anything you want to sum up to help people that we haven't really touched on? Is there anything before we sum up?
No, I think we've touched on so many important things. I think it's just, for people who are aspiring leaders, current leaders, or even if you're just the leader of your own life, you are worth the time to invest in the things that you value and the things that you just genuinely enjoy. Not everything has to serve the clear purpose. It does not have to be, quote, air quotes, productive. If you are doing something aligned with your values and that you enjoy, you are actually nourishing yourself, and that self-nourishment is going to make you that much more effective in business.
Yeah, and that's very good advice, for sure. And how do they contact you if they want to be able to use your services or want some advice from you? What should they do to get? Obviously, I'll put information down below, but how do they contact you?
Sure. Yeah, people can reach out on LinkedIn. I'm the only Malumir Logan on LinkedIn, and then also my website is acornandburdock.ca. But LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me.
Great, and thank you, and thank you for coming on a second time. I am blessed for sure to be able to come on a second time. So, with that said, listeners, I'm going to say goodbye. We'll see you next time when we say sayonara.